long overdue. So I think that's all we've got in the way of announcements, but just hearing the words "history is served" always gets me excited. We've got one of the best silent auctions anywhere. If you like silent auctions, it's worth it just for that. And not to mention Hotel Roanoke, great food and a great speaker. So, and great friends. So do that. And okay, so let's get on with the speaker. Speaking of history. As the Revolutionary War reached its 6th year, Colonel William Preston and his associates discovered and repulsed a loyalist plot with local ties that could very well have delivered Virginia into the hands of the British. In hindsight, this patriot triumph marked a major turning point in revolutionary Virginia, which we will hear more about tonight. We're going to hear about the cloak and dagger activities of a Botetourt spy who, for over 240 years, has remained a mysterious figure almost lost to history. Thanks to his post-war pension records, recently rediscovered, we now know who this unsung hero of the Commonwealth was. And we know how he played a vital part in securing America's independence. Our speaker tonight is Executive Director of Historic Smithfield and the Smithfield Preston Foundation. Michael Hudson is a native of Lynchburg, and he has worked in historic site management for over 25 years. He holds bachelor's and master's degrees from Liberty University and has extensively studied our local history as well as the American Revolution and the American Civil War. We are very fortunate to have Mike here tonight as he tells us about this amazing bit of history. So please help me welcome Mr. Michael Hudson. Set you this way.
Awesome, thank you. You go ahead and set yourself up in my position. This way.
Steve and I really appreciate that very kind welcome. As Mr. Warren was just saying in his introduction, I am from Lynchburg, as you may have surmised from the lapel pin that I'm wearing tonight. I was born in Lynchburg, I was raised in Lynchburg, I was educated in Lynchburg, but then when I met Roanoke back in 2018, she made it very clear to me, if things work out well and you and I get married, then you will have to come to Roanoke. I'm not going to Lynchburg. And so with those being the terms, I was bound to obey them. So thank you for coming out tonight. And our story does start with Lynchburg, but I should be very careful the way I say that, because Lynchburg wasn't a city at the time of the Revolutionary War. It was simply a ferry crossing called Lynch's Ferry. It was started by a man named Charles Lynch, who had immigrated to immigrated to Virginia in around 1720, and he came as an indentured servant. And he had, I believe, 6 children, if I'm counting correctly. He had 6 children. 2 of them during the Revolutionary War, 2 brothers, suffered a tremendous split over that war. One of them was John Lynch. His son John Lynch would go on to become the founder of Lynchburg, and he's the one who took over the family business of that ferry crossing. His brother Charles, on the other hand, he was cut from different cloth, I guess we could say. You see, John, the eventual founder of Lynchburg, was a pacifist. He was a member of the Society of Friends, whom the English derisively called Quakers. And because he was a pacifist, because of his religious convictions, he refused under any circumstances to be in rebellion to the government, and refused to take up arms and to fight against another person, even in self-defense. That was a little different from his brother Charles, who during the war was a very zealous and active patriot of the Revolution. So not only was he willing to fight, but Charles Lynch was also willing to sit in judgment of others, which is something that the Quakers did not approve of. And he also was willing to fight. And it's of all those things, you'd think that they would excommunicate him in pretty short order, but the thing that actually got him kicked out of the Quaker Church, this gentleman named Charles Lynch, was the fact that he, in order to take the government posts and to be assigned to certain committees or even to act as a witness to other people's wills, he was constantly taking solemn oaths. And that was a line that the Quakers were not willing to cross with him. And they summarily dismissed him from the fellowship. Well, what does any of that have to do with a Revolutionary War spy? Earlier in my career, I think it was in the year 2009, I was named the executive director of Avoca Museum, which was the home site of Colonel Charles Lynch. Well, a big part of the story was how Colonel Charles Lynch, during the late phases of the Revolutionary War and during the Southern Campaign and the most formative days of the Revolution, was able to locate and identify the ringleaders of a vast Loyalist plot. The Loyalists in those days were known to Virginians who were in favor of independence as Tories. This Tory plot was to be far-reaching. The Tory plot was going to attempt to return Virginia firmly into the hands of the British by first marching on New London in Bedford County today, still there today. It was one of only a handful of arsenals that stayed continuously in Patriot hands throughout the entirety of the Revolution. Capturing the weapons and the gunpowder there, the Tories then planned to move on Charlottesville and liberate British POWs who had been imprisoned on Barracks Road in Charlottesville ever since John Burgoyne had surrendered them back in 1777 following the Saratoga Convention. Then the Tories had designs and desires to march on Richmond, where our state capital had just been removed to. And the idea was that if they could capture Thomas Jefferson, the governor, they could hold him ransom for more British POWs. This was a pretty ambitious plot, and it's one of the stories that we told at Avoca Museum about Colonel Charles Lynch and how he managed to out the Tories, snuff out their plot, and keep Western Virginia firmly in Patriot hands throughout the balance of the conflict. But how did he do that? He was living in what we now call the southern reaches of Campbell County. It was then Bedford County in the late stages of the Revolution. Bedford County wasn't formed until 1782, 1783. So how did Charles Lynch come upon this intelligence? Well, it turns out that it was Charles Lynch and Hugh Crockett and William Christian and William Preston that worked together and worked with a Patriot spy. There are accounts that come out of the late stages of the Revolutionary War that talk about how these Patriot leaders worked with a mysterious spy. And I keep coming across one account after another, and it talks about the spy brought us intelligence, or the scout had some information that he was willing to share with us. Or our friend brought us some very valuable intelligence about what the Tories are up to in the New River Valley. But who's the spy? Finally, I came across a post-war account by one of Colonel Lynch's associates, also an associate of Colonel William Preston. Isn't it interesting that I ended up at two museums that tell the stories of two closely related patriots of the Revolution? Well, I digress, but maybe there was some design in all of that. but there was this one account that mentioned the spy, Mr. Wyatt. Okay, now I've got a last name to go on. It's not a lot, but it's something. And so, using a little deductive reasoning, I put on my detective hat and I began to reason that this spy was operating in Western Virginia, and knowing that a lot of men who lived in Western Virginia and who fought either in the Virginia militia on the Patriot side or enlisted in the Continental Army on the Patriot side. So happens that our subject tonight did both of those things, on top of some other stuff that we'll get into. But I reasoned that perhaps, just perhaps, he may have gone west after the Revolution. You see, Continental Army soldiers and militiamen who fought for the Patriot side often were awarded with land grants following the close of the Revolution by a grateful Virginia legislature who, quite frankly, after the war, were cash-strapped. But what they did have was plenty of land that was opening up west of the Appalachians. And so I began my search down in Kentucky, thinking that maybe our mysterious Mr. Wyatt went to Kentucky after the war. Kentucky was one of 4 counties that opened up when the old Fincastle County, and I say old kind of tongue-in-cheek, it was only a few years old when it was broken up, but Fincastle County was broken up into 4 counties immediately in 1776. One of those counties was so large that it nearly reached the Great Lakes in the north, and it did reach the Mississippi River in the west, and the name of that county was Kentucky. Wyandotte words. It means where the green pastures are, and that's where settlers were going in the years leading up to and including the Revolutionary War. But my focus had to remain on this Mr. Wyatt. Well, I got to looking through Kentucky's pension applications, thinking that perhaps if this man from Western Virginia, we know he was from Botetourt at the outbreak of the war, or at least that was what was rumored in this account that I found. If he went to Kentucky or he went some point west, I should start looking in the pension records, because perhaps he lived long enough to be an old man, and perhaps he would have applied for a pension, being that he served in some way the Continental cause, the cause for independence. Well, lo and behold, in a dusty file room in Frankfort, Kentucky, at the state capitol, I found the pension application of a man named John Wyatt. And so here is a transcription of his pension application, or applications, I should say, because you're going to see tonight that he applied twice in Kentucky and did not get his pension. And then he applied a 3rd time, and as they say, the 3rd time is the charm. He applied for a 3rd time living as an old man in the new state of Indiana, and he was awarded his pension. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. I got to looking through these pension documents, and I saw phrases such as, I met with Colonel William Preston and Colonel Charles Lynch, and they told me that the Tories were afoot in the New River Valley, and they were going to depend upon me to bring them intelligence, acting as a spy. And when I came across that phrase, acting as a spy, I thought to myself, bingo, there you are. Turns out the mysterious Mr. Wyatt was John Wyatt, and he was very accommodating to me in his pension records, because for a guy during the Revolution whose main goal was to keep a secret, he sure spilled his guts on those Revolutionary War pension requirements. He had to be very, very descriptive and very deliberate in telling his story, because the better, the more truth that he lays out and the better case he makes for his pension, the more likely he is to finally be awarded one. So, with that introduction now behind us, let's talk about John Wyatt, the man who identified himself in pension documents starting in the 1830s when he was an older man. In his pension documents, John Wyatt, this gentleman who identifies himself as our mysterious spy from Western Virginia in the late stages of the Revolutionary War, he said, "I was born in the city of London in England on the 4th day of June, 1748. So that makes him nearly 30 years old by the time the revolution breaks out. And doing a little bit more research, I found that indeed, living in Botetourt County in the years leading up to the revolution was a man named John Wyatt. Now, if this is the same John Wyatt, and it certainly is shaping out to be him, and I can tell that by a couple of clues that I'm going to reveal to you here very soon. By the records that are available to us in Botetourt County, he's indenturing. As an indentured servant, he is promising to work for a man. The man's name was Griffin, in a county that is now part of West Virginia. And he is an orphan, and he has at least one brother. And his indenture is basically an agreement between he and Mr. Griffin, who Mr. Griffin was apparently a master cooper. Who knows what a cooper is? There you go. He's a barrel maker. You knew that too, didn't you? He's indentured out to a barrel maker. So if he serves this man from age 14 to age 21, 7 years, at the end of that 7-year period, he is to be turned loose. But he's not just thrown into the deep end of the pool, so to speak. The man to whom he is indentured is obligated to give him certain things to help him get started with his new trade as a cooper living here in Virginia. And again, he appears to have been an orphan, and he found placement with this master cooper by a charitable organization called the Overseers of the Poor. Have you ever heard of the Overseers of the Poor? They're kind of like the United Way of their time. They really do a lot of work in colonial era Virginia. And many of them are folks from a variety of religious backgrounds. And apparently Mr. Wyatt found himself to be under their charge. They found good placement for him. So it appears from his indenture that he is the same one, because he identifies himself as being born in the city of London in June of 1748. So this is perhaps our Mr. Wyatt once again. So if I do have the same guy, and the chances that there are two John Wyatts living in Botetourt County at the outbreak of the Revolutionary War, fairly slim, I would imagine. But if it is the same guy, he was an indentured servant. And by the time the war rolls around, he's about 28 years, 28 years old at the time of the Declaration of Independence. And he is married, and he has already fathered a child. By the way, he was married to a Jane Stearns, and they had at least one child by the outbreak of the war. John Wyatt was a true patriot. It didn't take him too terribly long to get involved in the Revolutionary War. He joined the 8th Virginia Regiment. According to his pension request, this is either a scribe or an attorney who's speaking on his behalf and putting this information into his pension document many years later. For this pension, John Wyatt recalled, quote, he volunteered for 1 year in a company commanded by Captain Joseph Crockett. The regiment was commanded by Colonel Abraham Bowman, And once he had enlisted in a company was roughly 68 men and officers, that company marched off for Petersburg. Here also is a picture of a very famous gentleman that came out of that regiment, Peter Muhlenberg. Have you ever heard of Peter Muhlenberg? Some people refer to him as John Peter Muhlenberg. If you're familiar with that name, he came from the same regiment that John Wyatt served in. And this is a little pixelated. I apologize for that. But John Wyatt came from right here in what would have been Botetourt County at the time. And it runs clear into what we now call West Virginia. We're close to it. Botetourt County used to be massive, as you can see. And that was Botetourt County in 1776 at the time that John Wyatt joined up. The first place he goes from Petersburg is he is marched into winter camp. Oh, great, what a great way to enter the Army. The winter of 1777/1778 at Valley Forge, just west of Philadelphia. So I would say that he went right into the fire instead of the frying pan, but it was too cold to be considering adages like that. While the Continental Army, the men of the 8th Regiment, and our friend Mr. Wyatt were in winter encampment in Valley Forge, General Washington insists that European noblemen who are trained in the art of war prepare his army, and when they come out of winter encampment, they are going to be a fairly effective fighting force. This is the time that Baron von Steuben and some others take command of this, take charge of the training of this ragtag group of volunteers and turn them into a fighting force. And it works through all of the privations and the miseries of that winter of 1777 through 1778. Washington's army emerges from it as an army that can actually stand toe-to-toe with the British on the field of battle. And so their first, their test by fire, their trial by fire, so to speak, is at the Battle of Monmouth in June of 1778. The Americans come out of winter encampment. They are ready for a pitched battle against the British. Their commander, Charles Lee, leads them into battle. He sees that the British are there and the British are advancing, and so he turns around and withdraws from the field of battle nearly immediately. As he's trying to withdraw the army, he comes across a very incensed General Washington who has come up to join the army, and he wants to know why his army is retreating, especially when he's barely heard the sounds of battle in his front. General Lee replies to General Washington. He said, the British are here, they are well deployed. I don't have the advantage, and so I decided that the better part of valor is discretion, and so I began to withdraw the army. George Washington wasn't very pleased with that answer. He called Charles Lee well, we're in church. He called him a darned poltroon, and said that the British were not dislodged because he didn't even try them. And so Washington turned his army around, marched them back onto the field, and I'd love to tell you that they defeated the British that day, but the battle was a stalemate. That's a whole lot better than being driven off the field of battle in a scared panic, as was the case in some other battles that Washington's army had seen prior to this event. So there was a marked improvement. And that big battle was the first and the last of the first enlistment of John Wyatt. as a Continental soldier. Not too terrible for a military career, albeit very short. He only enlisted for 1 year. But John Wyatt wasn't done. He enlisted again as a Continental soldier. This time, he was sent down to Charleston for the siege of Charleston. By this point, the Revolution was entering its last years. The siege of Charleston carried on between March the 29th and May the 12th of 1780. And after the American Army, by the way, this siege of Charleston did not go well. The British besieged the city and captured the army defending the city. The Southern strategy for the Continentals was not going well. It was off to a great start for the British. Many of the survivors of the siege of Charleston fell back into the hinterland of South Carolina, and a command under the leadership of Colonel Abraham Buford was caught near the South Carolina-North Carolina border, and they were swooped down upon by cavalry commanded by the infamous Banastre Tarleton. This is the Battle of Waxhaws is the place where Banastre Tarleton's men gave rise to the coining of the phrase Tarleton's Quarter. Quarter means that you're taking prisoners, okay? There weren't a lot of prisoners that were taken as a result of this battle. Between 250 and 300 American soldiers were engaged in this battle. The Patriots would claim after the battle that Tarleton's men swooped down upon some of these survivors and hacked all of them to pieces. There were no survivors, that no quarter was given, and that's what, well, after the battle, that's why they started referring to Tarleton's Quarter, meaning no mercy, no prisoners are being taken. That's not the truth. Many of these men, according to period accounts, were cut down as they tried to surrender, but we know approximately 50 of them. I believe 59 was the number I was able to isolate. About 59 of them were marched away on their own power, and one of those 59 was John Wyatt. John Wyatt was taken back to Charleston, which of course by now is firmly in British hands and is the base of their southern operations in this last campaign of the Revolutionary War. Wyatt is interred in a prisoner of war camp in Charleston, and during his time there, he does something very interesting. He makes the acquaintance of an American officer named Joseph Seal. Joseph Seal, from the best of what I've been able to determine, was a Continental officer of the line. I believe he was a captain at the time of his being captured. He was captured along with Buford's men at Waxhaws with John Wyatt. John Wyatt and Joseph Seal get sent to prisoner of war camp, and in a very strange twist, this enlisted man, John Wyatt, and this officer, Joseph Seal, are now apparently confined together. I say apparently because these two gentlemen seem to have formed a relationship. And there was a way out of prisoner of war camp if you were willing to turn coat. And that's something that a lot of prisoners during the Revolutionary War on both sides did in order to escape the miseries and the privations of a POW camp. A POW camp, depending on what POW camp you got sent to, could be the kind of place where you went to die. British prison barges were basically retired ships where they drilled a few holes in the side of the ship for ventilation, and they kept men on those ships, and those men just decomposed until they just passed away due to some kind of terrible sickness such as pneumonia or cholera. And not all prisoner of war camps were like that, but you can understand why a person like Joseph Seal would be eager to get out of that. Well, he was willing to sell out the American cause, and he did turncoat. He made an agreement with his British captors that in exchange for letting him out of POW camp, that he would turncoat and he would start serving as a British provincial officer fighting now for their side. That's where Mr. Wyatt's fortunes seem to have turned, because Joseph Seal, as a newly minted British officer, in order to get his rank of captain, he, like many other British officers or British provincial officers, had to purchase their commission. I know that sounds very strange to us. We come from a society where an officer's commission, if I'm elevated to the rank of captain, it's because I've earned it, or I've put in the time, right? It's based upon merit or seniority. But that was not the case when one purchased their commission. He literally paid the British government for his rank of captain and all the rights and privileges thus appertaining. So Joseph Seal is now a newly minted British officer. He has purchased his commission. He is fighting for the other side. But he doesn't forget this man that he somehow, some way, made an acquaintance with when he was in prisoner of war camp. Because now, as a British officer, he has the right to get one of those prisoners out of jail, give them a get out of jail free card, and to assign tasks such as to run an errand into the city for me, or go get something, or go do this, go carry this message to this officer. And John Wyatt was chosen as the man to whom he would give an officer's protection. That was the word that was used for this. You have my protection. You're a prisoner. You and I were fellow prisoners. I am now in this position of power. I am offering you my protection. And so if I give you my name on a sealed letter, you can take that and you can mince around Charleston. You can run my errands. You can come back. Well, in the process, again, somehow, some way, I wish I knew more, but we can only go, unfortunately, on what Mr. Wyatt gives us in his pension documents. Somehow, some way, John Wyatt, after he gets the protection of Captain Joseph Seal, he comes into the ownership of a quart of rum, which he was able to successfully bribe his British officer friend. And now he has protection papers, and John Wyatt said it was very careful in his pension papers to make the distinction. He said, I bribed that British officer, but I was not completely set free from prisoner of war camp. I'm not just set scot-free and sent on my way. He said, but I was given a fair amount of mobility, which allowed me to escape my captors. How did you do it, John Wyatt? He didn't tell. That part wasn't relevant to what he was talking about in his pension application papers at that particular time. He just makes the point that I was able to leverage the good graces of Captain Joseph Seal, a newly minted British officer, and I was able to slip my captors and get out of Charleston. He gets out of Charleston and he makes his way all the way back to Western Virginia. How did he do all of that? Did he do it all on foot? Did he move at night and stay in homes of people that he thought were sympathetic to his cause? Not all people in the back country of South Carolina or North Carolina or Virginia, for that matter, were sympathetic to the Patriot cause. If he had boarded with the wrong family on his way back to Western Virginia, he could find himself back in POW camp. How did he do it? Well, again, he doesn't tell us. So we have to use our imagination. But what he does tell us is that when he gets back to Western Virginia, he is introduced to 3 Patriot officers. One of them he identifies as Colonel Hugh Crockett. Does that name sound familiar to anybody, just by a quick show of hands? Hugh Crockett is buried in the area that we now call like Shawsville or Elliston. He's just off of Route 11. And Hugh Crockett was a zealous and active patriot of the Revolution and was one of the key subordinates working for Colonel William Preston. William Preston was the second officer that Mr. Wyatt identified. And then he identifies a third one, and he said, I don't recall the man's name. And, keep in mind that this is decades after the fact that he's recalling this meeting. He said, I don't remember exactly the name of the third man, but I want to say that his name was William Christie. What he probably meant was William Christian, for whom Christiansburg is named. He was one of the key subordinates of William Preston in placating the Cherokee in 1776 and bringing an end to the Cherokee War of 1776. Of course, he led a whole wing of the army that went out into what we now call West Virginia to fight the Shawnee in Lord Dunmore's War, 1774. And so it's reasonable to assume that if he's in the same room with Hugh Crockett and William Preston, that that's probably William Christian that he was being interviewed by, to use his word. By the way, as a quick aside, Hugh Crockett comes into the story years and years down the road because he was able to write to Hugh Crockett when Hugh Crockett was approaching his very, very old age. I don't remember exactly how old Hugh Crockett would have been, but I imagine he must have been close to about 90 years old. Hugh Crockett was reached by John Wyatt many years later, around 1830. John Wyatt said, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm the spy who worked for you and Colonel Preston and Colonel Christie or Christian back in 1780. Hugh Crockett remembered him. And in a very shaky hand, he filled out an affidavit. And he said, what this man is telling you is true. He served in the Continental Line. He was later a militiaman. He served 3 different tours of duty, and he served as a spy for Colonel Preston and me. And so Hugh Crockett was able to verify and help Mr. Wyatt get his pension many years later. But anyway, to return back to the story, this is what came out of that conference with Crockett, Preston, and Christian. The Patriot officers with whom he met told Mr. Wyatt, we think it's wonderful that you've approached us and you want to get back into the service and you want to be returned to your regiment. He said, let's not worry about that. We have other plans for you. Apparently, these 3 officers, in learning about the details by which Mr. Wyatt was able to get out of prisoner of war camp, to talk his way out, to bribe his way out, to do whatever it took to get out of prisoner of war camp, everything except for joining the British. They thought, this is a crafty fellow. Maybe he could serve us in another way. And so these 3 Patriot officers told Mr. Wyatt, we've got a problem here in the New River Valley. By the way, another quick aside, this conference, in my imagination, because I am very biased, might have taken place in Smithfield, the home of Colonel William Preston. I don't think it occurred in my office, because that would have been a bedroom of one of William Preston's sons. But in my mind's eye, I just think, wouldn't it be so cool if this conference occurred at Smithfield? William Preston would have been the ranking officer out of the three. And if it's going to be at one of their homes, it seems to me most likely that it would be at Preston's. But the three Patriot officers say to to John Wyatt, I imagine the conversation sounded something like this: "Son, you obviously are very quick on your feet. You're a very clever fellow. We would like you to act as a spy. We know that the New River Valley Tories are up to something. We don't know exactly what their plans are. We don't know how many of them there are. And so what we want you to do is to go down into the belly of the beast and to mingle in with the New River Valley Tories. Find out who they are, find out who their ringleaders are, find out what their plans are, and when you find out these things, we need you to bring us back the intelligence so that we can act on that intelligence." You have to understand something about the late phase of the Revolutionary War in the New River Valley folks. It was largely Tory, and people who were proponents of independence were in the minority. One of William Preston's friends wrote to him during the Revolutionary War. This was earlier in the Revolutionary War, but he said, "Preston, you live in Montgomery County, and Montgomery County is a rascally county. There is an abundance of rascals, and my experience has been that an abundance of rascals makes a place rascally." And then he closed his letter, "I hope that you will take care to watch the Tories very carefully. Your life could be in danger." And William Preston knew this. William Preston had a lot of things to be concerned about during the Revolutionary War. He was placed in charge of the defenses of the lead and saltpeter mines down around what we now call Wytheville. He was tasked with organizing the war against the Shawnee, and sent his subordinate William Christian out to deal with the Shawnee. That war, by the way, ended after one momentous battle, the Battle of Point Pleasant, which I understand that you're going to be hearing about very soon from another speaker. William Preston had to be concerned with the Tories, because those were his own neighbors that he was contending with. William Preston was very concerned that he could end up murdered. A lot of people look at our American Civil War and they call that the war of brother versus brother. But brother, during the Revolutionary War, it was much nastier. You see, in the American Civil War, you had two parties that were fighting against one another, and they were largely separated by on a geographic basis, right? The North versus the South. Now, I know that there were exceptions to that. There always are some exceptions, but largely it was the North against the South. But in the American Revolution, especially in Western Virginia here, it was much more so a battle in which neighbor was turned against neighbor. Fathers disowned their sons, and their sons took up arms against their fathers. It was a nasty situation. Neighbors mutilated each other's livestock. They threatened to kill each other's children, and they threatened to kill each other, and in many cases, on both sides, they did kill each other. Okay, so this was a very volatile time to be alive in Western Virginia. And so Wyatt had to be very careful as he infiltrated the Tory ranks and learned about their plans. Well, he's going to need a backstory. He's going to need something to convince his Tory hosts when he gets down and amongst their midst that he is on their side. And so that's where Hugh Crockett has a really cool idea. He goes and he retrieves a letter by which Lord Dunmore, our last royal governor, before he was run out of Williamsburg by an angry mob, if you believe those reports. Our last royal governor signed a commission making Hugh Crockett a colonel of militia. Okay? These commissions were signed on parchment. Now, do any of you just want to, feel free to just blurt it out. Do any of you know what parchment is? Yes, it's an animal skin. More common than not, the sheepskin. Exactly. So because it's skin, just like ours, it has layers. And so you see where Hugh Crockett's going with this. He retrieved his old commission, and using a bladed instrument such as a knife, he skinned off the part of his commission that listed his name. And then he took pen in hand and scratched in its place, Joseph Seal. And so now Mr. Wyatt has the protection papers that he got back in POW camp of Captain Joseph Seal, and now he has a phony commission signed by Lord Dunmore himself, making Joseph Seal an officer of the crown. And now he has his backstory. And I failed to mention, on the way back from South Carolina, he got some. He took some newspapers, and he may have taken a British officer's frock coat from a source that he doesn't tell us about. I don't know how he came upon those things, but he had some documentation to support his story that he was a British officer. So he goes to the New River Valley and he finds some of the Tories, and as his pension claims, he was quickly accepted and entertained by them, they fully believing that he was indeed a British provincial officer by the name of Captain Joseph Seal. And he was merrily entertained by them. Something tells me that rum might have come back into the conversation. And as they say, libationous spirits like rum tend to loosen the tongue. And before long, according to his pension documents, they are singing to John Wyatt, thinking that he's a British officer. They are singing to him like a canary, and they're telling him about all their plans. Their plans are very ambitious. They're going to march very soon, within a matter of weeks. They plan to gather up and march on the arsenal in New London, out here in Bedford County. It's still in Bedford County to this day. Now the arsenal isn't there, but there are some pretty cool archaeological digs out there that have found some parts of weapons at the possible location of that arsenal. After the Tories attacked New London, then they planned to march on Charlottesville, liberate the British POWs, march on Richmond with weapons, and now soldiers liberated and bolstering their ranks. And the idea was to capture the Virginia government, the Patriot government, and with any luck, the chief executive, Thomas Jefferson. So this is a very, very ambitious and far-reaching plot. When Captain Seal, excuse me, Mr. Wyatt, hears about these plans, he tells the Tories, this is a good plan. I really like what I'm hearing, and I know that Lord Cornwallis will be very happy to get this intelligence once I get back to him. But will you delay your assault for just a couple of weeks? That will give me time to return to His Excellency Lord Cornwallis, to inform him of your plans. And I pledge to you that he is likely going to give me a contingent of his army to come up and act in concert with your stellar plan. If we act together and you act with the support of British soldiers or some provincials that I can bring up with me from Carolina, then we will have a greater chance of success. And hearing that, the Tory said, all right, we will hold off on our plot, and that'll give you enough time to let Lord Cornwallis know what we're up to. Well, as soon as he got that, John Wyatt made a beeline back for his Patriot handlers, and he let them know, boy, have I got a story for you. And this is what the New River Valley Tories intend to do. This is how they plan to do it. Oh, and by the way, we got into a little liquor, and I have a list of their ringleaders and where they live. Well done, Mr. Wyatt. And so, Colonel Preston, Colonel Lynch, and other Patriot militia commanders in Western Virginia raise the militia and send them out on a mission to make some arrests. According to one account that is post-war, there were 75 ringleaders of the Tory plot that were arrested in Southside and Western Virginia. Interestingly enough, and trials were held at various places, but most of these men, most of these 75, were going to be brought not out to Richmond for a trial. By the way, that's what Governor Jefferson ordered the Patriot leaders in Western Virginia to do. Send me these men and we will try them in Richmond. Colonel Lynch decided, no, I'm not going to do that. He fancied that if he were to bring them all the way out to Richmond, that would give the Tories time to wait alongside the roads where they could swoop down upon his men and liberate these prisoners. It would give them time to procure false witnesses and bring them to court out in Richmond. Colonel Lynch decided, no, we're just going to have the trials at my plantation, which is in what we now call Alta Vista, Virginia. Does anybody know where Alta Vista is? And interestingly enough, his trials were held on the grounds of his plantation called Green Level, which his descendants would rename in the future Avoca. So that was my first museum, Avoca Museum. Under the branches, according to Lynch family lore, under the branches of a black walnut tree, by the way, its descendants are still on the grounds to this day. Under the branches of a black walnut tree, Colonel Lynch tried several members of this supposed Tory conspiracy. The accused were allowed to bring witnesses to speak on their behalf. They were allowed to hire counsel to represent them before Judge Lynch's court. By the way, that's the reason he's carrying out these trials, because William Preston, William Christian, Hugh Crockett, none of them had judicial powers. Judge Lynch really didn't have judicial powers outside of his jurisdiction either, but that didn't stop him. And he found 16 of these individuals to be guilty of treason against the state of Virginia, and he ordered them not to be hanged, but to be flogged. 39 lashes well laid on that black walnut tree. And that has some outgrowths and some outcomes that I'd be happy to tell you a bit more about in our Q&A session if we have the time and you're not entirely tired of hearing me ramble on. But the simple fact of the matter is that after those trials, the Tory conspiracy in Western Virginia was snuffed out. And that was the end of that. And Western Virginia remained firmly in the hands of the Patriots until the end of the war. But what about our friend Mr. Wyatt? he did such a fantastic job outing the Tory conspiracy. He could go back to Botetourt County and take up the trade of coopering just as he had done before the war, and he'd still be considered a hero of the Commonwealth. Well, he saw an opportunity to serve his country, perhaps I should say to serve Virginia for a bit longer. And so he decided to re-enlist. He decided to enlist once again into Patriot forces. This time, he wasn't enlisting in the regular army as he had done the first 2 times. The first time, he went to Valley Forge and Monmouth. The second time, he went to the siege of Charleston. And technically, by the Articles of War, he was still a prisoner of war. But he decided he was going to re-enlist the 3rd time. This time, he was going to join the militia. And to really put his thumb in the eye of the Tories, he enlisted in the place of a Tory who, as a result of his trials, was judged to be in cahoots with the Tories, and so his sentence was to pay for a man to be sent to fight for the Patriot cause in his stead. And so John Wyatt became a militiaman who was paid a bounty by one of the men he turned in. And so he set off on his final foray into soldiering, this time as a militiaman, kind of like our equivalent of the National Guard. And he went to Yorktown, and he was present for the surrender of Lord Cornwallis. After Lord Cornwallis's surrender, he returns back home to Botetourt. And then things kind of get murky. What happened to John Wyatt after Lord Cornwallis's surrender in October of 1781? He simply wraps it up in his pension documents by saying, "I was considered to be in the service until the end of the war." After the war, I was able to find out a little bit about John Wyatt. As I've already told you, he did leave a paper trail. And I followed his paper trail in 1830 and 1832. He comes before the clerk's office in the 2 counties in Kentucky where he was residing. He resided in Gallatin County, Kentucky in 1830. In 1832, he's living in a different county in Kentucky. I'm not recalling the name of that county. But then, in the same year, 1832, he moves and he is applying for a pension in the new state of Indiana. And he is applying as a veteran of the war. The first 2 times he applied for a pension back in Kentucky, he was denied because the finding was that he did not show up in the Continental Army's original rolls. Somebody had apparently lost the records, if Mr. White is to be believed, and I think we have every reason to believe him. And then they couldn't find his militia records either. There were a lot of soldiers that this happened to, unfortunately. My research has turned up at least a dozen that I know of, that we can show that yes, they did serve in the war, but later on the War Department lost their records. Mr. Wyatt was, despite the fact that he was turned down for his pension, in 1803 the United States government gave him 100 acres of land for and in consideration of his service during the Revolution. So somebody found his records, somebody found his story to be believable. It was around 1803 he was awarded 100 acres on the Green River in Kentucky. He sold that land for 20 bucks. If my calculations are correct, $20 in 1803 would have about the same purchasing power as $500, a little over $500 today. I'm not entirely sure about those calculations, but I pulled out the old formula and dusted it off. I got something like $507 worth of purchasing power in the year 2025. $20 doesn't sound like a lot, but it was a lot more back then, but still, that doesn't seem like a whole lot to give a man who did so much for our country. He was also promised back pay that he did not receive during the Revolution. He claimed not to receive during the Revolution. What happened later on after the war was that he sold his back wages, like the claim. He was to sell a paper stating, I have a claim on this money. He sold it to a Patriot officer that he identified as Captain Madison. He reported that I have not seen or heard from Captain Madison ever since. So that it's likely that nothing was going to become of that. He, as I said before, he applied for pensions in Kentucky in 1828 and 1830, and later in Indiana in 1832. I think I misspoke earlier and said that his two pensions in Kentucky were 1830 and 1832. It was, I would go with what I put up there because I was looking at the records when I did it. 1828, 1830 in Kentucky, and later in Indiana, 1832. By 1832, his wife has apparently passed, and he is living in the home of his married daughter. I was able to do some searching on GenWeb and Ancestry.com, and I actually came across a woman who claimed to be descended from John Wyatt. And she stated that from the family lore, that after the war, he was regarded in the family to be a fine British gentleman. Maybe he still spoke with his British accent. Maybe that's what made him more convincing to the Tories in the New River Valley. He was, after all, as you recall, born in London. Now comes the part of the talk that is a little bit sad, so brace yourself. Mr. Wyatt, in 1833, finally was awarded his pension of $80 for a year. He received that first pension payment in Indiana a few days after his 85th birthday. Only a few days after that, he died. So after all that work in his twilight years that he put into getting his rightfully due pension from the United States government, he finally got the first payment and didn't even have time to spend it. So Mr. Wyatt is, the only thing that would make that story sadder is if he was buried in an unmarked grave. But I am happy to tell you that he is buried in a marked grave. That's his grave. It's in Milroy, Indiana, in a cemetery whose care has seen better days. But he is he is buried in this ground, and his stone, up until just a few years ago, was the only testament of his service in the Revolutionary War. The stone, of course, and his pension records. And if we just take the time to go in and review the pension records of these soldiers, we might find more than we bargained for. And so, tonight I close by telling you the last few things about my experience and learning, getting to know Mr. Wyatt over the past several years. This gentleman did more for his country than most people will ever be able to claim. And he deserves better. He deserves to be remembered. What he did took a lot of guts. And it took a lot of love for a country that was barely out of its infancy. we owe John Wyatt and people like him a tremendous and lasting debt of gratitude. What he did during the Revolutionary War, we'll never know the full story. We'll never know the full story, but we can be 100% grateful. And so with that, I'll close tonight. Thank you.
Certainly got time for a few questions. I mean, if you're long in the seat, go ahead and stand for a second and stretch. But I think a lot of us would have a follow-up question. So who'd like to ask Mike? Sir.
After the war, between that time and his death, did you go back to being a cooper, was he a farmer, you know what?
I wasn't able to find out about that, except for he makes a statement that farming the land on the Green River that he got from the government did not suit him. I don't know exactly what he meant by that. Maybe he just figured that he wasn't cut out for life as a farmer, but it didn't suit him.
What about the lashes?
Yeah.
What about
Okay.
the lashes?
All right. So you went there. Okay. I'm going to reward your curiosity by giving you the long and the short of it. What Charles Lynch did to his prisoners in 1780, it didn't get to the point of killing anybody. Even his enemies, even his Tory enemies, did not accuse Charles Lynch of murdering anyone, although 3 men died in his custody as prisoners. He decided at Price's Fork, I believe this was in 1780, only a couple of miles from Colonel Preston's house, that he was going to sweat a confession out of 3 of his Tory prisoners. And so he put them in an outbuilding and started a fire in the downstairs fireplace. This was summer, and those men were likely dressed in more than we dress in today. And he was building up the heat on them. He was literally trying to sweat a confession out of them. When some of his subordinates cautioned him that if they continue up with this kind of treatment, these men are going to die in their custody, which would not be good. That's not good PR for the Patriot cause. That would give a lot of ammunition to their Tory enemies, wouldn't it? And so these subordinates were able to prevail upon Lynch to let these men have a break and go down to a spring there, Price's Fork, and drink some water out of a spring. Well, they apparently drank so much, and they even, one report says that they divested themselves of their clothing, and they jumped in the spring, and their body temperature dropped so quickly, all 3 of them went into cardiac arrest. And they died in Colonel Lynch's custody. Well, how do you think that went over with Colonel Preston? Not well. And he had some he sharply excoriated Colonel Lynch for his mistreatment of these prisoners. Now, the ones that he took to Green Level, his plantation in what we now call Campbell County, in years in the future, just 20 years is all it took. But by the turn of the 19th century, in the year 1800, what Lynch, the treatment he gave the Tories, he called it Lynch's Law. By 1800, that term has been shortened, and it's now part of the Oxford Dictionary, and it's been shortened to lynching. Okay? In 1780, Colonel Lynch was not singling out people on account of their race. And he wasn't murdering anybody, at least not on purpose. What he was trying to do was he was practicing extralegal justice. He traveled outside of the confines of Bedford County to make arrests and to bring them back to Bedford County, out of his, back into his jurisdiction, and hold the trial. And then there was summary punishment that was practiced under a tree. Okay? By the time the year 1800 rolls around, It's still, the term lynching has, it involves summary punishment, extra legal justice, and a tree. But now it has taken on a fourth component, and that is murder. And their fifth component joins that one, and it is based on a person's race. So yes, the term lynching did get its start with Colonel Charles Lynch, but what that meant in the context of 1780 and what it meant in the context of 1800, just 20 years later, two very different things. And it does feature racial murder. Another point I wanted to make about this is that the common denominators of the tree, extra legal justice, and summary punishment. Interestingly enough, after the Revolutionary War, Colonel Charles Lynch is prevailed upon by his Quaker brother, John, the founder of Lynchburg. John approaches Charles, his brother, and said, for somebody who is so wrapped up in this war, claiming to be about the rights of man, you seem to have no respect for the rights of the slaves that you hold, just like our father held slaves. And he said, if you really believed in the standards of the revolution that you claim to purport, that you claim to uphold, then you would free your slaves. John Lynch had started a grassroots effort during the Revolutionary War, to convince Virginia planters to give up their slaves, to manumit, not emancipate. Manumit means you are freeing them by a proclamation. Emancipation means when the government forces you to do that. Okay? To manumit, to free on your own volition your slaves. And his brother Charles says, you know something, you're right. And so they together started to make the rounds in Virginia, trying to convince other planters to free their slaves. And so a lot of people look at that and they say, oh, you know, I've heard it my whole life. I don't want to go to Lynchburg. That's such an ugly sounding place. Back in 2020, during the fallout of George Floyd, there are a lot of people, a sizable number of people in Lynchburg say we should change the name of Lynchburg because it has that ugly word lynch in it. But if they only knew what the standards of their founder were, then they'd be proud to bear that name. And so that is just a quick aside of everything that I just described to you by this spy. One of the things that came out of that was that Colonel Lynch came to renounce slavery after the Revolution and encouraged others to do the same. Unfortunately, by the time of his death in 1796, the movement had fizzled out, largely because of the efforts of our state, which passed a series of laws making it harder for a person to free their slaves. So you went there, and I went there with you. I hope you enjoyed the trip.
Mike, thank you. I want to thank